Friday marks the 100th anniversary, the centenary of Arthur Erickson's birth. Easy question, perhaps. Why is he still important today?
Well, that's actually a complex question because, Vancouver both loved and hated Arthur. He's our most famous and influential architect. But for 20 years, at the peak of his powers, from 1984, when he opened the Vancouver Art Gallery, reconstruction, until the Waterfall building by Granville Island, he didn't do a single building in Vancouver. And part of this was because he was fairly direct in his opinions. He delivered them in a very elegant, diplomatic way, but he wanted Vancouver to be better. He wanted the buildings to be better. He was an early advocate for density, more people living here. He was also way ahead of the curve on energy issues. The law courts down at Robson Square, they were originally not heated under all that glass. It was a very early breakthrough solar heated public building. And then I think his most famous building, which is I'm so happy to say is reopening this week, is the Museum of Anthropology. The Great Hall has been absolutely and completely rebuilt for seismic reasons. And with that, he was way ahead of the curve in taking the traditional architecture of BC First Nations very seriously. As you know, the concrete portals, the great big soaring spaces with the totems in the Great Hall, that is an abstraction of the house forms of Haida and Kwakiutl First Nations up the coast. In this, Erickson is way ahead of the curve. Almost nobody else in Canadian architecture was taking First Nations architecture seriously. And now we have architects of First Nations background doing designs, but Arthur blazed the trail for some of them.
Now, what are some of the better-known examples of his work? I'm thinking SFU, the aforementioned Museum of Anthropology, Robson Square. Let's expand upon that a little bit.
Yeah, you've hit the greatest hits there. Those are probably his best-known buildings. There's probably two that your listeners will be interested in to add to that list. Along Georgia between Thurlow and Butte, there's that great big waffle iron of a concrete elevation. It used to be called the Macmillan Bloedel Tower, and now I'm happy to say the investors from Toronto who've bought it have renamed the building Arthur Erickson Place. And that's a rare honor for an architect to have his name on a building he designed. Again, it's quite amazing, very bold. It's got very thick, as I call it, kind of waffle, brutalist concrete. It's got two wings that kind of slightly slide, displaced from each other, a little plaza out front. It is really the boldest and most original office tower we have downtown. And I'm glad to see it's still a vital address and still full of top-level businesses. The other, perhaps less known Erickson work that is very visible for Vancouverites is the Waterfall building, right near the entrance to Granville Island. What Arthur did there is that he wanted to show that you could get similar housing densities in a courtyard configuration, more like European cities, rather than the thin tower on townhouse podium formula that he thought was being used too much in Vancouver. So he built his critique, he built his new idea, and you have this quite marvelous space off of West 2nd. You pass by a wall of water and then into a courtyard where there was to be a kind of wedge-shaped restaurant business, and then around it you have 5, 6, and 7 stories of flexible apartments. They can be either apartments or offices. And then you look up, and there's kind of corkscrew stairs going from the top level up to the roof deck. So everybody had their own little secret stairway to get up to the roof deck, which has got one of the best views in the city. You have the downtown skyline with the mountains behind. So I encourage people, if they've never done it, go take a look at the Waterfall building. I think it's one of his best and one of his last buildings that he was totally in control of. Sadly, Arthur suffered from dementia. His last few years were difficult, and he died in 2009. But I have put together the events this week really as a celebration of his memory and to remind people that really good designs and original urban ideas make life better for everyone.
Before we dig into that, I just wanted to go off script for a second here. Do you think that we are
Sure.
doing enough to preserve Erickson's built heritage?
Well, it's been a concern. We've been losing some of Arthur Erickson's buildings, especially his houses. One of the most famous ones, the Graham House in West Vancouver, was demolished for no reason almost a decade ago. It's still an empty site. Nothing was built in its place. BC has the weakest heritage legislation of any OECD country or area, so we don't really have strong legal protections on them. That's one reason why the Arthur Erickson Foundation exists. We have a committee called the Stewardship Council that keeps an eye out for changes or problems with potential demolition of Erickson buildings. So we're doing our best as a nonprofit community organization. But I really think the secret to saving Erickson's legacy is to get the public involved and interested in the work. And I guess that's part of my duty as a critic and a curator of architecture, is to keep the information, the images flowing, show people what we have, and I think there will be greater and greater support for keeping this legacy alive.
Tell me about Erickson on Film, a Centennial Celebration that you have coming up at VIFF.
Well, I knew the birthday was coming up this week, and I wanted to do something that would reach out to the public. I think architects are pretty savvy, know that he's one of their great leaders, but the public often asks me things about which buildings are by Erickson and so on. So I wanted to do something to celebrate it. I talked to the director of the Vancouver National Film Centre, Tom Charity, and I said, well, why don't we do something that would take some documentary films and also Hollywood feature films that have Erickson's buildings in them. And it's a very interesting way to kind of obliquely look at his legacy. In other words, how has he changed the city? What was it, especially in the 1970s when they were new, what was it that brought Hollywood directors and actors up here to use Erickson designs as their locations? So I picked two of the best of them. On the opening night, on the birthday of June 14th, we're showing a film called Intersection, starring Richard Gere as an architect who's very, very much like Arthur Erickson, and his architect wife, Sharon Stone. And because they came up here to scout locations, a local filmmaker, now film producer, Christine Habler, knew Arthur and knew his works and took the director and the stars around to see Erickson buildings with the architect. They were so impressed, they really modified the film to be all Erickson, if you want. The houses shown are Erickson houses. They modeled the office on Erickson's office. And there's a very, very crucial scene between Richard Gere and Sharon Stone shot in the Museum of Anthropology, beautifully shot. And you have the totems, the potlatch bowls, almost cast as actors, commenting on the action within. So it was a way to open up public knowledge and to look again at the legacy of our most famous architect.
How do you think Erickson should be remembered?
Well, I think he'll be remembered in his buildings, and some of them, I don't think anyone's out to demolish Robson Square next week. I think they'll be around for a while. That's the nice thing about architecture, is it endures. I think one thing that we should remember was Arthur's constant advocacy for a better city. In other words, for Vancouver to come to terms with its inevitable status as a great world city. About 15 years ago, Erickson created great controversy when he told Vancouverites and their politicians, their planners, that they needed to start planning for a city of 10 million people. Now, Vancouver didn't have a million back then, but he said, we have to think ahead. And I remember late in life, a few years before he died, I talked to Arthur about it, and he said, I should have said 15 million. So that's the kind of forward thinking he showed us. And I do think his commentary on the city, on his urging of better design from everyone, his willingness to be blunt with clients and politicians, that they needed to try harder. I think that legacy of his words and his criticism is very important. I know personally, from architecture school on, Arthur was a key mentor and sponsor of my own critical writing. I probably wouldn't be doing it without him, and I think we should keep that legacy going.
And finally, Trevor, what do you hope folks take away from these events that you're putting together?
Well, I think architecture, as Ms. van der Rohe said, architecture is in the details. So I hope they go away with a bit more knowledge to understand what the thinking was behind some of these buildings they know, how were they conceived, who worked on them, the enormous influence Arthur's had on other architects in this city. Jim Chang, who really invented the idea of Vancouverism, he came to Vancouver to work for Arthur and stayed here. I think the more people know about this legacy, the more interesting it gets. In my view, Canadians should know Arthur Erickson and his works in the same way they know the novels of Margaret Atwood or the paintings of Emily Carr. He's really up there in the firmament of leading minds in the creative arts in Canada.
All right. Trevor, that does it for my questions. Is there anything else you want to get in there that I may have missed?
I think you've got it. Again, as long as you keep the focus on Arthur and not on Richard Gere, that's fine.
I can do that.
By the way, after they became friends, Arthur and Richard Gere became friends, and Arthur designed a house for him, sadly never built. But, it's very interesting that Los Angeles probably became fans of Arthur and his works before Vancouver in some ways. The film shot at Simon Fraser, called The Ground Star Conspiracy, is another, it's a chilling kind of Cold War thriller, but this SFU campus portrays a evil computer hub, and it does it well. Almost every scene, the whole movie was shot at Simon Fraser. And when I asked my friends who studied there what their memories were of being an undergrad at SFU, they all came up with the same phrase. I remember the smell of wet concrete. So I called the evening that we're showing that one, the smell of wet concrete.
Well, just as a quick aside, I too went to SFU, and I was there when they shot the Arnold Schwarzenegger film, The Sixth Day, and there was a chase scene right through the Convocation Mall, right in front of the academic quadrangle, and I'd like to think that was part of Erickson's legacy in a small way as well. That particular film.
Absolutely, it's funny. I saw clips from that too, and they were such bad quality we couldn't use them in my series. But good on you. You didn't happen to take a picture of that while you were there, did you?
No, this was pre-smartphone, I'm afraid.
Yes, okay. You had to lug the 35 millimeter around. Yeah, no, it's amazing. Erickson's nephew, Jeffrey Erickson, is part of our final night program on the 18th. And he's done an amazing job of logging all of the films and TV shows that have used Erickson's locations. And it's a pretty impressive list. And, there's great similarities between filmmakers and architects. I studied a bit of film myself and worked in it for a while before architecture school, and they're collaborative arts. No one person can make a film any more than one person can make a building. You have to collaborate with lots of bright people and do well. And you can see that filmmakers and writers and set designers, et cetera, really saw the originality of Erickson's buildings, and wanted to thought that this is a great way to catch the eyes of our viewers, and I think they're right. So I think it's interesting to me as a critic how quality comes out. Sometimes quality is recognized early, as maybe the LA filmmakers did, or it comes late, as maybe Vancouver is starting to come around to understanding what a legacy we have of Erickson. But I think in the end, quality shows. And it's funny, even in the real estate world, Bob Rennie was a friend and supporter of Arthur Erickson, especially in his late life. And he always used to say that quality is the ultimate sales tool, that good architecture will last and keep its value. And I think he's right.
I think that's a fine place to leave it, Trevor. Thanks so much for this.